Chapter 16. Farewells and New Beginnings. It was Rat who decided that Toad's recovery should be marked by a lunch. "It's too easy," he said, "to let significant events pass by without notice or celebration. Perhaps it's because we usually only recognise their importance after the event." For reasons best known to himself, Rat chose to hold this event at the Red Lion, an old coaching inn with a central courtyard and wood-panelled dining rooms. The waiters seemed as old as the building, with drooping moustaches and long white aprons which reached down to their cracked black shoes. Even before Rat entered, he knew what the menu would be: brown winter soup, roast Norfolk turkey with chipolatas, followed by sherry trifle, some dried cheddar, coffee extra. He arrived first in order to check that the private room he had booked was properly laid up. Rather to his surprise, the appearance of the room, called the Isis Room, was excellent. The table laid with gleaming white starched cloth and napkins, sparkling glasses, and heavy old-fashioned cutlery. He studied the wine list, and, as he expected, saw several wines of good vintage and reasonably priced. He ordered a couple of bottles of claret, and then he repaired to the bar to await the arrival of the others. He ordered a pint of his favourite beer, OBJ, which stood appropriately for "Oh, be joyful," and in a spirit of great contentment leaned on the bar and quaffed his ale. The next to arrive was Toad. He was feeling relaxed and at ease, and was looking forward to meeting his friends and telling them all that had happened. But as he walked casually through the courtyard, having leant his bicycle against the hotel railings and straightened his new cricket club tie, his legs turned to water, for he recognised exactly where he was, and the events associated with the place flooded over him. For this was the Red Lion, the very inn where, having escaped from his reforming friends years ago, he had eaten an enormous lunch, and then, oh horror, he could scarcely continue, he had stolen a beautiful motor car and driven straight to prison. Luckily at that moment Rat appeared at the hotel doorway, and in his sensitive way he said, "Hello, Toady. You look as if you've just seen a ghost. You're the first to arrive. Come on in and I'll buy you a drink." Regaining his composure somewhat, Toad followed Rat into the bar. The oldest waiter gave him a long and inquiring look, but Toad was able to stare back and handed him his coat to hang up. "What will you have then?" asked Rat. "A pint of bitter?" "Certainly not," replied Toad. "You can always have a brandy and soda." "Nonsense, Toad," replied Rat with some spirit. "I can remember many times when you've had a beer." "Name one," said Toad, practising his new-found assertiveness. Fortunately, before the discussion could become too heated, Mole and Badger arrived together. They had shared a cab, and Badger, as usual, had managed to get Mole to pay. "Hello, Badger. Hello, Mole." Soon they were all standing up in a group at the bar and talking animatedly. "Good idea of yours, this lunch, Ratty," said Badger, in his kindly way. "Well done." Rat half thought he might have had his head patted. Toad was telling Mole one of his tall stories, and Mole was saying, "Really?" and "Then what happened?" But in fact he had heard it before, and was thinking about lunch. At that point the old waiter came in and said to Rat, "Lunch is ready now, sir, if you'd like to go in." So in they trooped, and they were soon eating their soup and tucking into their turkey, helped down with liberal glasses of the excellent claret which Rat had chosen. Then there was the sherry trifle, which actually had some sherry in it. "That's unusual," said Badger. "Usually the chef merely waves the cock over it." Toad and Mole both had seconds, and then cheese and coffee were served, by which time everyone was feeling mellow and contented. Toad was about to take out a very large cigar from his cigar case, when a stern look from Badger made him replace the offending weed, patting his pocket as if he were merely looking for his handkerchief. "Well," said Badger, smiling affably at all of them, "so what are you all planning to do now?" There was silence. Small animals do not usually do much forward planning. Regularity and rhythm within the framework of the changing seasons provide the comfort that keeps anxious thoughts at bay. To change involves risk, and risk brings danger, and danger means threats. But after all they had been through and learnt about themselves, change had already happened to them, and they knew they had to move on, whatever the risk. They were all growing up and learning how to put away childish things. So it was inevitable that each of them had made plans, even though, so far, they had not shared them with each other. "Shall I start, then?" asked the ever-helpful Mole. There was a chorus of agreement, and so Mole continued. "I'm going back to Mole End. I'm going to turn it into a restaurant." The Rat, who had no knowledge of this, blurted out, "But you can't cook for toffee. You can't even boil an egg." "Go and boil your head," said Mole under his breath. But in a louder voice, "I shan't be doing the cooking. I've got a very good chef. Do you remember Otter's young cub, Portly, who once got lost, but we found him. Well, he's quite grown up now, and seems to have been touched by the gods. He can cook the most delicious fish dishes, and his desserts are a delight. His speciality is bread and butter pudding, and we are going to open it soon, and it will be called the Garibaldi." "I remember now," said the rat. "I only visited your house once, but it was a very snug and compact place, and you had a bust of Garibaldi in your garden." Mole smiled with pleasure. "You remembered, Ratty. I'm so pleased. And do you remember the rest of the garden? The goldfish pond, the cockle-shell border, and the silvered glass bowl that reflects everything all wrong? Well, that is where the restaurant will be. Otter is putting up the money, and will be my partner. But I shall manage it, and Portly shall be the chef." "Well done, Mole," said Badger. "I shall come and patronize you frequently. I like my grub, I do." Badger could be remarkably vulgar when he chose. "I'll be there too," said Toad. "What a ripping idea. When will you open?" "Probably in the autumn," replied Mole. "You know, when most animals are fairly quiet and beginning to slow down, will appreciate the particular ambience of Mole End." "I know exactly what you mean," said Badger, who welcomed the undergroundness of Mole's house. Mole continued, "And then, in the spring, we shall do picnic hampers, you know. Cold tongue, cold ham, cold beef, pickled gherkin, sour French rolls, cress sandwiches, spotted meat, ginger beer, lemonade, soda water, that sort of thing." "I wonder where he got that idea from," thought Rat, remembering that was their very first picnic on the river, but said nothing. Mole stopped. He realized that until recently he would have been much more shy and reticent in speaking. Now he was the center of attention, and was describing his plans clearly and interestingly. He felt stronger and happier than he had done for a long time. He leaned over to the rat and said quietly, "You will come, won't you, Ratty?" "Of course, Moley. I shall be your most regular customer." Ratty smiled his twinkly smile, and they both knew they would stay firm friends in spite of Mole returning home. "Well, how about you then, Ratty?" Toad asked. "What will you do now that you will be all on your own?" Rat swallowed hard. He had known for some time that this would be an awkward moment, but it had to be faced. Looking into the middle distance, rather than directly at any of his friends, he said, "I am leaving the river bank." "You're going to do what?" in his severest tones. "I'm going to leave the river bank. In fact, I'm going to move to a grey seaside down in the south. It's a lovely little place with a harbour which has one steep side with tall stone houses and gardens running down to the rocks." Rat's voice had become stronger, and his eyes glistened as he visualized the place he was describing. "When you look down the flights of stone steps overhung with great pink tufts of valerian, you see patches of sparkling blue water. The harbour is full of little boats tethered to the rings and stanchions of the old sea wall, and all the time a small ferry boat keeps chugging from one side of the harbour to the other, taking people to work and bringing them home again. When you walk out of the town, there is a pretty beach where you can shrimp and where they serve cream teas on trays, and you can eat sitting on the rocks. In the spring, all the woods and pathways that wend their way along the cliff top are carpeted with primroses and violets, and you can climb up and look out to see ships from all over the world sailing in and out of the harbour, their sails billowing white like clouds above them." Ratty stopped. His friends knew that he liked to write poetry, but this was the very first time they had heard him speak like this. They were entranced. "But," Toad said gently, "won't you be lonely without us?" "No, not exactly," answered the rat. "You see, I shall be renewing the acquaintance of an old friend of mine. He was a seafaring rat from Istanbul. I hadn't seen him for ages, but recently he wrote to me from that seaside town in the south offering me a job. He owns a small bookshop called Wayfarers All, which specializes in travel. He wants me to manage it. Apparently it's just opposite the parish church, and it only takes a minute to walk down to the town quay. I shall live above the shop, and although it will be very different from my beloved river bank, I mean to make a go of it." "Well, Ratty," said the Mole, "you have surprised me. You really have. But as you were talking, I remembered how long ago you became obsessed with going south, as you called it, and I almost had to fight you to make you see sense. Are you sure this isn't just another attack of southern fever?" Rat smiled. "No, Mole, this is quite different. It is true that those memories have lingered, and in fact, that was when I first met Alessandro, my seagoing friend. But since then I have carefully considered what I want to do, and what differences this change will make to my life. You will always be my close friend, Mole, but I must move on. And besides," said the rat quietly, "I'm going to write a book." "About what?" asked Toad. "Perhaps about you, Toady, and you, Badger, and you, Moley, and about all the adventures we have had. For no matter what happens, those memories are so vivid that I can run them like a film through my head." "What will you call it?" asked Mole. "I'm not too sure at the moment. Perhaps The Breeze in the Bushes." "Not much of a title, that," said Badger disparagingly. "You need something more gripping to gain the public's attention. How about Boats and Badgers? That sounds much more exciting." "We shall see," said Rat. "As I said, I'm still undecided. But if I can write the book, I know I can find the title." He had known it would be difficult to break the news of his departure to his friends, and when he had started to speak he had felt extremely anxious. But once he got going, he knew what he wanted to say, and he knew that he had said it well. In fact, he had practiced in front of the bedroom mirror until he felt confident, even deciding when to speak softer and when to pause for dramatic effect. And he had been effective, but not too effective, thought Rat. I don't want them down all the time visiting me for a holiday. The waiter brought more coffee and a dish of petite fours, and everyone helped himself. Toad and Mole began to quiz Rat about his plans, which left Badger sitting rather impatiently and looking pointedly at his watch. "So I expect you're all wondering what I'm going to do?" he asked. "Yes, of course we are," said Toad warmly. "You know we are. It's just that Mole's and Rat's plans are so surprising and exciting." "And you don't think mine will be, is that it?" Badger asked aggressively. "No, of course it's not like that," said Rat. "Tell us your plans." "Stop acting like a baby," thought Mole, at the same time looking at Badger with polite interest. "Well, all right," said Badger, somewhat mollified. "But you'll all need to pay attention, like Mole here, because I have some very important news." The others composed themselves, feeling that they had just had a wigging from the headmaster. "As you all know, for a number of years I have given a great deal of time to local affairs. I have been proud to represent the many simple and mainly honest folk who live in the wild wood. There are many important issues which have to be dealt with, like keeping out the developers who want to build horrid bungalows on the edge of our wood, and which would increasingly encroach on where we live, or stopping them building a road through part of the wood for your wretched Poop-Poops Toad." Toad was about to protest and say that was a long time ago, and nowadays he bicycled everywhere, but Badger's stern looks and loud voice made him keep quiet and look suitably apologetic. But as Badger went on, Toad knew that what he was saying was true. Badger was a patrician, and, not surprisingly, many of the smaller animals in the wildwood looked to him for a lead in local issues and felt safe under his protection. Badger had got elected onto the parish council and then onto the Wildwood Rural District Council, and had worked hard to protect the wood and its inhabitants. In another age he would have been a Green, but for Badger it just seemed natural to preserve the habitat where they all lived and on which they depended for their sustenance in life itself. "My philosophy has always been," Badger continued, his half-moon glasses on the end of his nose giving him an air of wisdom and authority, "that there should be one nation, and, therefore, one wood. We need to integrate people, not split them apart and drive them into factions. Those of us who have been blessed with the world's goods have a responsibility towards the deserving poor, and I like to think that I have contributed towards this by setting up our local Woodlands Hospital, of which I have the great honour to be chairman." He paused, waiting for the round of applause, but none came. "Well, I'm blowed," thought Mole. "He's a blessed Tory, and it's as if he's giving us his election manifesto. I'm not having that. Do you think I'm one of the deserving poor? I'll show him." But Badger moved on, allowing no room for interruptions. "Individual freedom, with proper concern for the less fortunate, can only exist within the framework of the law. Those who break the law must be punished, and punished severely if the crime warrants it." At these words Toad had gone pale and was fingering his tie as if it were preventing his breathing. The memories of his appearance in court before the magistrate and his subsequent incarceration could still come back and give him the horrors. "I say, Badger," said Rat, "steady on, remember who's here." Badger stopped instantly. Although he could be pompous and bossy, he could also be warm and caring. "I say, Toad, I didn't mean you. I just wasn't thinking. Careless of me. Please forgive me." "All right," said Toad, "but I am still very sensitive about that issue." "Of course you are," replied Badger. "I have always believed that if someone pays their debt to society, as you have, Toad, then they should be fully rehabilitated and integrated into society." At these kind and generous words Toad felt much better and poured himself another coffee. "So when I was appointed chairman of the local bench," Badger continued, "it seemed to me that my different activities combined to form a lifetime, if I may say so, of service to my fellow creatures." Mole knew that Badger was proud of his achievements, and not at all reticent about his activities and appointments. In fact, the brass plate by Badger's dark green door just below the iron bell pull, which Mole so clearly remembered from one of his most terrifying adventures, had recently been replaced. The new plate, neatly engraved in square capital letters, now read, Mr. Badger, J.P. "Well," said Toad, who by this time was growing slightly impatient, "you mean that you're going to carry on doing the same things that you're doing now?" Badger gave him a very stern look. "Not that there's anything wrong with that," Toad added hastily. "Life of service, commitment to the community, that sort of thing, very important." Mole started to giggle, but a sharp kick from Rat on an old wound on his shin made him stop. "If you would only listen, Toad, you would hear the really important news that I am going to impart." They all waited expectantly, and Badger, looking extremely important, said, "I have been asked to stand as the parliamentary candidate for the next election." For a moment everyone was silent. Then they found their voices, and came up to Badger and shook his paw, clapped him on the back, and congratulated him, and Badger enjoyed every minute of it. "I can just imagine you as our MP," said Rat. "You could always make a good speech. You are as straight as a die, and you have a genuine concern for everyone on the river bank and in the wildwood." In spite of his differing political views, Mole knew a good animal when he saw one, and before he knew it, he was shouting, "3 cheers for Badger! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!" Badger was genuinely moved by this spontaneous show of affection and regard, and wiped his eyes on the red cotton handkerchief he always carried. There was much talking as everyone told everyone else what a good MP Badger would make, and how they were not at all surprised by the news, and Badger was saying how he would welcome help with addressing envelopes, and that sort of thing. Gradually the talking trailed off into silence, and Toad found that his 3 friends were looking at him with an air of expectation. "Well, come on, Toad," said Mole. "We're all waiting to hear your plans. I'm sure they will be absolutely wonderful." Poor Toad. He had been rather dreading this moment, for it reminded him of another time when he had had the opportunity to amaze his friends with his scintillating wit and song, and then had thought better of it. That was some years ago now, the banquet he had given to celebrate the reoccupation of Toad Hall. Then, as now, he would have liked to take the stage and amaze and delight his friends with his great oratory, or perhaps a stirring song sung in his pleasing tenor voice. But he knew now that this would be inappropriate, and not express what he really wanted to say. Toad, the great entertainer, master of 1,000 disguises, terror of the roads, was a fantasy, and a dangerous one at that. Whenever he had adopted one of these roles, it always ended in tears or worse. At that previous banquet he had behaved in a modest and unselfish manner, only because he feared the wrath and displeasure of Badger, whom he had seen as a severe and critical parent. Now he chose consciously not to play the fool, and remembered from his Sunday school days the story of Polycarp, a venerable and scarcely remembered saint. Polycarp was about to be martyred when he heard a voice saying, "Be strong, Polycarp, and play the man." So Toad said to himself, "Be strong now, and play the toad." "Well, look, you fellows," he said, quietly yet firmly, "I certainly have made some plans which will have a great effect on my life, although you may think them dull. You see, I've taken a job." "What?" said Badger in utter amazement. "You mean you're going to undertake paid and gainful employment?" "Yes, I am," replied Toad, looking Badger unflinchingly in the eye. "In fact, I have already started." Rat fidgeted in his chair. Trust old Toady to amaze us, he thought. "But what is it?" Rat asked. "What exactly are you going to do?" "I'm going into estate management. As you all know, I've spent a lot of my time managing the hall. It's not been all caravanning and driving fast cars, you know." Here Toad tried to look severely at Mole, but he could not keep it up. He started to grin, and then he laughed with Mole, and then all the others joined in. "That's nice," he thought. "For the first time that I can remember, they're all laughing with me, not at me." "No, but seriously, you chaps, there is a lot of work to do on the estate, seeing the whole farm is properly managed, cutting and planting timber and that sort of thing. So I've got together with a couple of others, and using the money which Father left me, we're going to set up our own estate and property business. Because of my particular experience, I shall be looking after the better end of the market, such as riverside residences and country estates." "The snob end, more like you," thought Mole. "I have to tell you, Toad," said Badger, "that I am both pleased and delighted. I know that your father would be equally pleased, and not a little surprised. Well done, Toad." These words were music to Toad's ear. "What will your company be called?" asked the practical Rat. "We shall be called Knight, Toad, and Frankly. We are currently setting up offices in London. We are currently negotiating for premises in the Strand." "Did you say London?" asked Mole in a rather anxious voice. "Isn't that in the wide world, to which I thought we never went or even referred?" "Tosh," said Toad spiritedly. "There's a great deal of nonsense talked about the wide world. Of course, when you are small and have only lived in a restricted community, it can appear big and threatening, but after a bit you can find your own place in it and play a much bigger role. I believe I can gain more autonomy there, and there are certainly more opportunities to be had." "Well, you may be right," thought Mole. "I'm glad I'm not moving. I know the river bank, and it knows me. If that's a restricted community, then I'm all for it." "So will you be staying at the Hall?" asked Rat. "No, I've sold it." There was a stunned silence at this news. Badger was horrified. "You've done what? You've sold Toad Hall? You know what they will do with it, don't you? They will turn it into a hotel, or, God forbid, a safari park with foreign animals, which have no right to be here." "Calm yourself, Badger," said Toad, controlling the situation most ably. "I have sold it to a group of businessmen who are going to turn it into a management college. We have agreed that the main building will stay untouched." "It has to," interrupted Badger. "It's a listed building." "Although no doubt they will need to build a bedroom block and other facilities," continued Toad, quite calmly. "To tell you the truth, it's a burden off my shoulders. The hall is getting increasingly expensive to maintain. The west wing needs re-roofing, and the kitchen needs to be completely refurbished." "So where will you live?" asked Mole. "I have bought a house in the village, the old rectory. I'm sure you know it. It's quite a nice late Victorian house with a manageable garden and lovely views across the valley, and it means I can easily walk to the station and catch my train to the city." "Presumably travelling first class and not on the footplate," said Rat rather pointedly. Toad was about to be quite angry, but instead he laughed and said, "Yes, Ratty, I shall be travelling quite legitimately and not pretending I am a washerwoman." "Toad," said Mole, "you never cease to amaze me. Since the first time I met you many years ago, I have always found you exciting and larger than life. I know you have got into all sorts of scrapes, but at least you have lived an exciting life. Compared to me, I feel you've drunk life's experience to the last drop. So won't you find your new life rather dull, just being something in the city?" "Oh, you really are the most perceptive creature. You have spoken the thoughts that at one time I dared hardly admit to my consciousness. There certainly has been a lot of excitement in my life. Stealing cars, escaping from prison, being a master of disguise, outwitting the police. Oh, yes, I've had some excitement, that's for sure." Here Toad's voice was starting to rise, and he began to puff himself up. But he quickly realized what was happening and resumed a calmer disposition. He coughed and then continued. "I have decided to join the local amateur operatic society, but where I can have fun playing a role on stage rather than getting it mixed up in real life. And without conceit, after a thorough audition, I have been given the lead in their next production." "Well done, Toady, good old Toady," his friends chorused, showing their genuine pleasure. "What's the part?" "I am to be the pirate Toad. I wear a hat with a skull and crossbones on it, a striped jersey and an eye patch." "Sing us one of the numbers, oh please do," asked Mole imploringly. "Yes, come on, Toad. This is one of my favourite comic operas." "Very well," said Toad, "but you must join in the chorus." He waited for silence, and then he started. His voice was clear and melodious, and he was able to strike just the right note of mock heroics. After each verse, the others joined in the chorus, which consisted of these words. Toad. "For I am a pirate Toad, hurrah for the pirate Toad, and it is a wonderful thing to be a pirate Toad, and it is a wonderful thing to be a pirate Toad." By this time all the friends were laughing and singing, and Toad was getting into the spirit of things, and was in danger of singing the whole of the first act, when there was a knock on the door. The old waiter came in and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but have you finished? We have to clear away and prepare the room for another event this evening." Rat looked at his watch and was amazed to see that it was almost 6 o'clock. Coats were fetched, goodbyes said, and everyone went out into the cool, clear evening. The taxi, which had been waiting for some considerable time in the yard, drove up to the front entrance, and Mole and Badger got in. The driver was about to give them a piece of his mind for being kept waiting, but when he saw that it was Badger, he decided otherwise, and wished them a good evening. They drove off, with Mole waving out of the window. Rat sauntered off down the road, swinging his cane, thinking about summer at the seaside, and imagining what kind of a boat he might buy to sail in the harbour when he moved south. Toad put on his bicycle clips, pulled out a flat cap from his overcoat pocket, adjusted it to the correct angle, mounted his machine and pedalled off towards the hall. His head was full of what he was going to do, and he was feeling in a very good frame of mind. He recalled how his friends had reacted to the news that he was starting his own business, and especially what Badger had said to him. "He's not such a bad old stick," he thought. "I think I dealt with him rather well." And he found himself humming a tune that he had not thought of for ages. As he remembered it more clearly, he began to sing the words softly to himself with great enjoyment. "The world has held great heroes, as history books have showed, but never a name to go down to fame compared to that of Toad." He laughed with delight when he had sung this. "Well," he said, "it's only a bit of fun, and actually it's not a bad poem." And so he decided to sing the remaining verses, only this time, because there was no one around, he sang them at the top of his voice, only finishing as he cycled up the drive of Toad Hall, breathless but happy. "The clever men at Oxford know all there is to be knowed, but none of them know half much as intelligent Mr. Toad. The animals sat in the ark and cried and torrents flowed. Who was it said there's land ahead, encouraging Mr. Toad? The army all saluted as they marched along the road. Was it the king or Kitchener? No, it was Mr. Toad. The queen and her ladies in waiting sat at the window and sewed. She cried, 'Look, who's that handsome man?' They answered, 'Mr. Toad!'" That is the end of Counselling for Toads, a psychological adventure by Robert de Board, performed by Julian Franklin.